Well, thank you, Peter, for that very kind introduction. Once Peter introduced me before a talk, and he said I was intimidating. Me intimidating. When a guy his size says a guy my size is intimidating, that's a good way to start your talk. So thank you very much. It's always a great joy for me to be here at the GSM. This is only my second time, but you guys spoiled me last year. I mean, you really did. Every other audience pales in comparison. Of course, usually I'm talking to an audience that's either indifferent or out and out hostile. But I'm always desperate to feel the love. They tell you when you do public speaking, you should try to find somebody to focus on in the audience. That way you sort of get over your nervousness. Now, you don't want to stare at them. You look like a psycho stalker, so don't do that. That's bad. But, so I try to look down, and I always try to find that one person to focus on. So anyway, a couple months ago, I went to give a talk, and I'm talking, I'm doing my usual spiel, I'm doing my jokes and, my tired, worn-out material, and I look out, and the only reason I know people are alive is I hear some coughing. Okay? So I do look down, and there's this young lady on the front row, and she seems to be the only person in the whole room that's getting it. She's kind of shaking her head, so I'm feeling the love. I still got it. So I start talking to her. Now her whole body is moving. Well, my whole body starts moving. It's sort of like she's playing the drums, so I'm playing the drums. And we're having this, even though I'm in front of a whole room full of people, I couldn't really see her face because the lights were in my eyes. But I could see that body language. And she's just getting into it, and I'm getting into it. We're reliving the 70s, Every so often I throw in some Saturday Night Fever, little Mick Jagger, I'm getting into it. And then I look down, and to my horror, she's shaking her head no. I've done something wrong. I don't know what it was, but that just pulls me right down. So, in come the elbows. I'm now talking in a tone of voice like a robot. And finally, she's shaking her head again, doing her drums. And we go back and forth like this the whole time. I'm up, then I'm down. I'm up, then I'm down. I mean, I'm sure the audience thought I needed to get back on my medication. I don't know. Finally, at the end of the talk, when she's gone back and forth, she's given me the love, she's withheld the love, I catch her in the lobby. And I said, I have to know. Please tell me. Why was I doing something right sometimes and then doing something wrong other times? Please help me understand. And she says, wait a second, you were the speaker, right? So talk about short-term memory loss. It was just 3 minutes earlier. And I said, yeah, I was the speaker, but what was going on? Why were you telling me yes and then telling me no? And she said, well, I was texting my husband, and when I liked what he said, I was going, yeah. And when I hated it, I was going, no. It had nothing whatsoever to do with what I was saying. So you guys spoiled me. This is your fault because I feel the love here, but I didn't feel it there. So there's nothing like preaching to the converted. Well, in my sermon today, what I want to do is I want to talk about 6 different topics. First, I want to talk about legislative initiatives. There's a lot that's happened in the 13 months since we were at Whistler. You might say it's been the best of times and it's been the worst of times. It's been the worst of times because, as we all know, the economy has been so wretched. It's also been the worst of times because we have continued to see restrictive legislation, at least in some markets. So we're going to talk about what's driving that restrictive legislation. We'll look at some trends, but I'm going to argue there's something fundamental going on. It's not just the conventional wisdom, it's not just the urban legends, it's not just the hoodoo voodoo that we've talked about before, although that is part of it. I'm going to argue that what's going on is people are looking for an easy solution. And they think they have the quote-unquote solution to solid waste, which is ban the product. But they're not going through an analytic, linear decision-making process. They're not looking at a problem and then looking at potential solutions. They're not going through the cost-benefit analysis, trying to get the biggest bang for their buck. They're not looking at those, they're not implementing a solution and then evaluating it. That's what you should do. Instead, what they're doing, at least many of our opponents, is they're just jumping to the solution. Again, quote-unquote solution. Ban the product, and the problem is solved. Well, let's take the logic of what they want to do. You want to ban the product? Let's start with your solution and work backward and ask ourselves, if you banned all polystyrene foam food service products, what problem would you solve? So we're going to look at a solution in search of a problem. What we're going to see is that doesn't get you there. You ban all polystyrene foam food service products in the world, assuming you could do that. You don't solve the solid waste issue at all. You may even make it worse. And so we're going to offer an alternative solution, which is recycling. Now, recycling doesn't get you everywhere you need to be, but it's a big part of the solution. And what we're going to see is there are a lot of things going on at DART, CARE, Recyclapack, but there are other initiatives that the corporation is undertaking, and we're going to see that a lot has changed in the last year with respect to recycling polystyrene foam. And we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about public relations and issues management. You can have the greatest products and programs in the world, but if nobody knows about them or if they have all these misperceptions, then you only have a limited practical effect. So we're going to talk about what DART has been doing. And I'm not talking about public relations where we spend millions of dollars on advertisements for the Super Bowl. I'm talking about getting the right message to the right people at the right time. That's what we mean by issues management, being strategic. And then I'll have some comments at the end about addressing or handling a hostile audience. So that is our agenda. It's pretty ambitious. We'll just jump right in. Yeah, I love to start off any talk about legislative initiatives by talking about our good friend Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck was a 19th century Prussian general who today is best remembered for his aphorisms or his sayings, more so than his being a general. But he once said, "Laws are like sausages. It's better not to see them being made." Well, relax, but here before lunch, we are not going to talk about sausages. But we will talk about laws. That's scary enough. And I want to focus on 4. There are more that we could discuss, but I think these 4 are the ones that can show us some legislative trends. And the good thing is, these laws, these proposed laws, these bills, never passed. So that's good. The first one, I think many of you will probably recall, is California AB 1358, sponsored by Hill and Nava. Now, this was a state-level bill, and had it passed, it would have banned the sale and use of polystyrene foam food service products in the state of California. I mean, wow, is that scary or what? Not only would we have lost the all-important California market, which is bad enough, but there would have been spillover effects. Other states would have said, well, gosh, if California can go green by banning the evil styrofoam, maybe we should too. So needless to say, our company and our industry pulled out the stops to try to get this bill defeated. Now, we didn't actually defeat it, but it was kicked over into 2010. And we have used the interim period to try to get to legislators who are somewhat favorable to us to tell them our arguments so that this thing will never pass. We'll see how that goes. They call this the dance of legislation. And it's the dance of legislation because it's not necessarily a rational, linear process. I know a lot of our customers got upset about 1358. There were articles in the California newspapers. I know Nation's Restaurant News had some articles. Some of our national accounts got pretty upset. So we're going to continue to see 1358 or some variant thereof. But we feel good that we have this under control to the extent that we can. Other legislation that we saw this year was California AB 283, which was sponsored by Wesley Chesbrough. Those of you from California, you may know, Wesley Chesbrough has always been an opponent of our industry. Now, this bill was not specifically about polystyrene foam. It was what we called an EPR bill, Extended Producer Responsibility. It says if you put a product into the stream of commerce, you were obligated to take it back. It's modeled on the old bottle bill. I know when I was a young boy growing up in South Carolina, I financed my bubblegum habit by picking up old used glass bottles and taking them back to the 7-Eleven. I get $2 or $3 worth of bottles and, just chew up all that bubble gum. So I thank you and my dentist thanks you. The idea is to take that same concept of collecting trash, litter, and providing a financial incentive and then applying it to other products. And that sounds initially pretty good, but there are a whole host of administrative problems. Who's going to pay the money? Who's going to collect the money? I bring in a foam cup, I get 5 cents back, great. What if I bring in half a cup? Do I get 2.5 cents? What if I bring in a cup that's been mowed by a lawnmower? What do I get now? So there's a whole host of problems. EPR legislation is very much in vogue at the moment, but it's got a lot of problems. So that did not pass, but we'll probably see some sort of EPR legislation again. Other legislation we saw in Washington State, we saw House Bill 2089. That was sponsored by Representative Chase. And what she wanted to do was to take the Seattle Ordinance and make it apply to the entire state of Washington. Those of you who remember the Seattle Ordinance, it requires that if you use a food service disposable product, it has to be biodegradable or compostable. The problem with this, of course, is very few commercially viable products are available that meet the American Society for Testing of Materials standard, which is you have to biodegrade in 6 months or less. So in effect, if this legislation had passed, it would have required all restaurant operations in the state of Washington to use reusables. And you may say, well, that's ridiculous. Well, again, go back to laws and sausage. Okay, it doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be legislation that passes. And fortunately for us, this did not pass. The last bill I want to talk about was a proposed ordinance in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. If this had passed, it was another prohibition on polystyrene foam food service products. That would have been a significant public relations disaster, not to mention the fact that we would have lost Philadelphia. Fortunately, we had an industry coalition that fought this legislation, and Ray Ehrlich, who is my counterpart in Baltimore, I think many of you know Ray, Ray actually led this coalition, and the lobbyist that we had hired helped Ray get in and meet with the governor of Pennsylvania. Those of you who read Information, which I'm sure is everyone, you may recall this photograph. This is actually a clamshell that the governor signed to his friends, his gang, at Dart Container. He didn't actually help us defeat the bill, but it never hurts to have the governor on your side. So it's been the best of times, and it's been the worst of times in legislation. It's been the worst of times because we see all of this, but it's been the best of times because we've put together a team that has helped to defeat this legislation. We're doing a lot of this behind the scenes, but we're working every day to try to make sure the markets stay open. Now let's be fair. If you weren't in our industry, if you didn't work for Dart Container Corporation, you might be tempted to say, well, gosh, what is there out there about styrofoam, as it's incorrectly called? I'm going to do a Google search. I want to educate myself. And of course, if any of you have done a Google search, I think most of us probably have, there is a lot of junk out there. In 5 seconds, you can find a lot of quote-unquote information. Most of it is incorrect. I know I did a Google search preparing for this presentation. I even picked up, all kind of stuff, but I picked up a routine by the comedian Jeff Foxworthy. Those of you from the South, you probably know Jeff Foxworthy. He's a comedian, and he does this little routine. You might be a redneck if. That sort of strikes home for me, being a Southerner. For those of you who are not from the United States, redneck is, let's just say it's a low-class person and leave it at that. Okay? Well, Jeff Foxworthy, I mean, he has this big routine. I mean, he says stuff like, you might be a redneck if your front porch collapses and you kill more than 10 dogs. Yeah. You might be a redneck if you mow the lawn and you find a car hidden out there on blocks. Okay. Well, this Google search that turns up the word styrofoam, it says you might be a redneck if styrofoam is your formal china pattern. Okay. That's pretty funny. I mean, we get a little chuckle. I enjoy a joke as much as anybody. The problem is, look at the underlying message. You know, styrofoam, as it's called, is a negative product. It's a low-quality product. Now, I don't think Jeff Foxworthy is out to get us. He's just trying to get a laugh. But nonetheless, those sorts of messages are out there, and it doesn't take long to find them. What else can you turn up in a Google search? Well, we're going to see in a minute that there's some cartoons. But what people see is they see this product, and it has become a symbol, a negative symbol. Now, you and I see this product, and we think, you know, it's inexpensive, it's lightweight, it insulates well, it's sanitary, and so on, all the features, advantages, and benefits that you get trained on. But other people see this, and this is what they think of. If only we could ban the product. And again, they think this because look at the kind of stuff that's out here. There's a cartoon. And again, I got this on my Google search. The guy is at his anniversary dinner with his wife, and he says, so I got to thinking, sure, a diamond is forever, but so is styrofoam, essentially. Anyway, happy anniversary. Okay, the idea is, you know, again, a negative message underlying this. Our product lasts forever, and that must be a bad thing. Look at this other one. The health plate is low in sodium, cholesterol, and sugar. The downside is it's high in styrofoam. So it even has a kind of muted health effect or health claim. So these are the kinds of things that are out there. Now, we had some good fortune earlier this year. How many of you saw the Dilbert cartoon that came out in July? So some of you. Okay. Well, Scott Adams, who draws the Dilbert strip, he had 2 cartoons in July. This first one has Dilbert talking to the boss. We replaced our styrofoam cups with paper cups, but it's not so clear it helps the planet. And the boss says, we didn't do it to help the planet. We did it to look like the sort of company that cares about that sort of thing. And then he says, oh, in that case, it's working great. And he says, as soon as you stop whining. You know, this kind of hits close to home for many of our customers. I mean, I've had customers say to me, I believe everything you've told me. I've seen the data. I know you're telling the truth. But you know what? It's the perception. I'm just going to deselect because when I use paper, I don't get yelled at. And that's sort of like someone saying, I know I'm being ignorant, but I'd like to wallow in it. Leave me alone. What do you say to that? Well, there's another Dilbert strip. Our company has replaced styrofoam cups with paper cups to save the planet. They work just as well if you use a dead squirrel as an oven mitten. And then the squirrel starts fighting him, and he says, this one still has some fight left in him. I looked into this. We can get the reprint rights for $60 per strip, so maybe we need to do that, Peter, and use this in our fight against some of these crazy messages. But there's a lot of stuff out there. And again, most of it is negative. So I completely understand why it is that our opponents, even those who don't necessarily hold us in low regard, why it is that they want to get rid of our product. So what I want to do then is I want to take this search for the easy solution. Ban the product. That's the easy solution, quote unquote. Well, let's take that premise and let's look for a problem. We're going to take a solution and search backward for a problem. This is an old trick. If you ever took any logic in college, they call this a reductio ad absurdum argument. It means to reduce to absurdity a particular set of premises by looking at their logical, or in this case, illogical conclusion. So let's do that. Somebody says, I want to ban your product, and you say, why? And they say, because it's litter. I'm trying to get rid of litter. That's it. So if we ban all the styrofoam, we won't get rid of all the litter, but we'll get rid of most of it. This photograph is from Jean Kwan's website. Jean Kwan is a legislator in California. And she has proudly said, I helped the Oakland ban on polystyrene pass. Yeah, she could have helped the poor, she could have helped the uneducated, she could have helped the homeless, but she went after the tough problem, the styrofoam. This is what she wants to be remembered for. Now, we all know if you get rid of all the foam, you still got to put coffee and hamburgers in something. You know, the Cascade Policy Institute, which is a think tank, they did an analysis of the Portland, Oregon polystyrene foam ban. And you know what they found? It doesn't change litter when you ban polystyrene foam. All it does is change it from the most efficient material to the second most efficient material. So all you've done is introduced an economic inefficiency. That's it. And so bans don't work. They don't get you where you need to be. Okay. Let's see. If the problem that I'm getting at is not litter, I know it's a similar problem. It's biodegradation. That's it. The problem with your product is it doesn't biodegrade. Now, I always tell people, and again, preaching to the converted here, that biodegradation is not the right answer. It's not even the right question. If you read William Rathshe's 1992 book, Rubbish, The Archaeology of Garbage, he tells you in that book, he does a whole history of Western civilization's garbage. And what he says is, if you go back in history and look at all of these health problems, they come from biodegradation. If you went to the 14th century in Western Europe, 50 million people died. Why? They died because they were infected by the fleas on rats. And the fleas on rats, the rats were attracted to the garbage. So it was always the dream of solid waste and sanitary engineers to come up with a way to stop this trash from breaking down. And at the end of World War II, they came up with a sanitary landfill. Take out the oxygen, take out the sunlight, take out the water. You can't completely stop the biodegradation. It's going to continue, but you can retard it. You can make it anaerobic, so it takes 20, 30, 40, 50 years for the carrots in the newspapers to break down. Then you've got to vent the methane, you've got to collect the leachate. So if you had to choose between a biodegradable product and a foam cup, you obviously don't want to put anything in a landfill if you don't have to. But if you had to choose, give me the inert foam cup. So all these people who say, oh, I wish I had a PLA cup, I wish I had a cup that broke down, it's not the engineers of the landfills that are saying that. But nonetheless, people who are otherwise intelligent, who otherwise might even have a high school diploma lurking somewhere in their background, they nonetheless start just pulling all these figures out of the air and plugging them in. It takes X number of years for something to biodegrade, as though somehow this has solved the problem. This is sort of like the old medieval monks arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. What is this going to get you? You know, if you're a scientist and you're making predictions about what's going to happen in the future, typically you do that based on what's happened in the past. And they've only used polystyrene foam in food service applications for between 50 and 60 years. So the best you could say, assuming you even wanted to talk about biodegradation, is foam cups last longer than 50 or 60 years. That's about all the data tell you. And yet people want to plug in these figures. So, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to be silly too. This is the GSM. We can get, jiggy with it. Okay? We're going to be silly, and we're going to plug in some figures. They're just pulling these figures out of the air or elsewhere. Okay? So we're going to do it too. Okay? So let's plug in some figures. I want you to see how silly this gets. By the way, I caution you at the outset, don't try this at home. If you do this with your loved ones or your customers, it's going to get ugly. Now, I'm a trained professional. I went to law school. I know about sarcasm. Okay? So leave this in the hands of the professionals. But let's have some fun anyway. If it takes 100 years for a foam cup to biodegrade, that means, here we are in Washington, so I got to have some sort of historical figure. 100 years ago, William Howard Taft became President of the United States, 1909. So what you're saying is that his foam cup is just now breaking down. You know, they always have round numbers, 100 years, 200 years, whatever. I've always thought, you know, it's like 211 years and 8 seconds. But that's just me. Okay, so 100 years ago, William Howard Taft had this cup, and it's now breaking down. That's pretty silly, but let's get sillier, shall we? That's why we're here. 200 years ago, James Madison in 1809 became president. So if you say a foam cup takes 200 years to biodegrade, what you're saying is his cup is just now biodegrading. Now you might be saying, oh, come on, you're getting too silly for words now. Oh, yeah? Well, Steve Kitzman, who works with Christina Gafana to put on the GSM here, you might have seen Steve walking around this week. I've gotten to know Steve this year, and he went to the Central Florida Zoo with his family earlier this year, and he took this photograph of a sign at the zoo, and he emailed it to me. Now, this is a sign that's put out by a company, Blue Earth Solutions, that claims that they're recycling polystyrene foam. I say they claim because we can never quite figure out where it's going. But anyway, they're supposed to be one of the good guys. They're on our side. And look what they're saying. First of all, they're calling it styrofoam incorrectly. But they're saying styrofoam is not biodegradable, and it can stay in the landfill for 400 years. 400 years. So in other words, William Shakespeare's foam cup is just now biodegrading. You know what's amazing, too, is Shakespeare lived before the Industrial Revolution. They didn't even have the machinery to build a foam cup, but gosh, he's already using it. By the way, just as an aside, whenever I think of Shakespeare, I think of biodegradation. I mean, don't you? And I think of biodegradation, you can find just about anything you want in Shakespeare's words, in his literature, and it can be contemporary. Well, Shakespeare, he lived at a time in the early 17th century in Elizabethan England, where it was not uncommon to dig up a grave and reuse it. I think we've read some stories in the US about that happening here in our country, and we're not very happy about it. Well, Shakespeare wasn't happy either. He wanted to, if you will, pardon the stretch here, biodegrade in peace. So he wrote a curse that was actually put on his gravestone. I call it the biodegradation curse. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man who spares his stones. Cursed be he who moves my bones. So you see, biodegradation history, it's all fun. But I digress. Let's go on, a little bit more silliness. 500 years. It takes 500 years for a foam cup to biodegrade. So that means that the foam cup that Niccolo Machiavelli, the Italian philosopher, that he used in 1509 is just now biodegrading. You know, this is actually a good historical figure for us to take note of. He wrote a book called The Prince, and it has a very famous phrase, exitus acta probat, the ends justify the means. Do whatever you have to get your way. Lie, cheat, steal, whatever it takes. I think some of our opponents have been reading their Machiavelli. Well, let's stop quibbling now with a few hundred years here and there. Let's take the silliness into hyperspeed. It takes 1,000 years, nice round millennium, 1,000 years for a foam cup to biodegrade. What does that mean? That means the foam cup that King Ethelred the Unready used 1,000 years ago when he was the King of England, that is just now biodegrading. By the way, they called him the Unready because when he was attacked by his opponents, he didn't do anything to defend himself. Another figure we need to take note of. All right, I'm getting really, really, really silly. A couple of more things of silliness, and then I promise we'll get back to something a little less silly. All right, let's don't quibble with a few hundred or a few thousand years. Let's really get silly. It takes 1,000,000 years for a foam cup. 1,000,000 years, I've heard this. It takes 1,000,000 years for a foam cup to biodegrade. So that means Raquel Welch's cup from 1,000,000 years BC is just now biodegrading. I'll be honest, I just wanted to show you the poster. You saw through me. Okay. Now, the silliest thing I've ever heard, well, I say this now, I always say something like that and then someone comes up with something worse and I stand corrected. But so far, the silliest thing I've heard is foam cups never biodegrade, ever. When the sun burns out and our planet goes black and it implodes, all that will be left that mankind ever existed is some 8J8s. Huh? That's it. So that means that the foam cups the dinosaurs used are still around. I guess we now know what killed the dinosaurs. It wasn't the Yucatan Peninsula and some sort of meteorite. It was foam cups. You see, I'm getting silly, but the point here is people start telling you all this stuff, and it has no practical effect. It's silly. If you ban foam cups, that doesn't help you with the problem of litter, and it doesn't help you with the problem of biodegradation. All right, you say. What about this? Marine life. Your product kills marine life. Let me say at the outset, I don't want you to think I'm being too flippant. Imagine me too flippant, okay? But, you know, at our house, we love animals. When my daughter was younger, if there was a stray cat that needed $1,400 worth of vet bills, no problem. We would rescue it, take it in, spend the money, and then she grew up and left home. Guess who works out of his house? So we do love animals, although if you call me sometimes and you hear cat fights, well, it's a zoo around there. But I want to say that even though I'm going to make this point, I don't want you to think I'm too flippant. I do care about animals. But this idea, you are choking sea turtles. Your product is being swallowed by these birds and they're dying in record numbers. Well, when you ask somebody, well, why do you say that? Where's the data? You know what you often get? Well, my brother-in-law was at Myrtle Beach and he saw some turtles snacking on a thermoglaze. That's a second or third hand report. Show me the data. You know, I'm one of these guys who wants to see the data. Well, there's a study that is sometimes cited from Europe. We got Cheryl Dykheis in our office to find the study. Guess what? The study says the biggest problem for marine life, fishing nets. Fishing nets from commercial fishing fleets. The nets break off, and they capture this life, and the life can't get loose, and it either gets eaten by something else or it starves to death. It also mentions plastic bottle caps. You know, you have a bird or a turtle that swallows it, and now they can't process food, and they starve. But you know what the report does not mention? Polystyrene foam. So the only data that is ever cited for the idea that our product kills marine life doesn't mention our product. Now, if you're predisposed to hate our product, that doesn't bother you. But if you like data, it bothers you. So does our product kill marine life? Maybe. Just nothing to say that it does. All right. As you start knocking these arguments down, people get upset. Doggone it, you're taking my arguments from me. Here's the piece de resistance. Your product uses chemicals, and those chemicals are poisoning us. We had somebody write in one time, and when they wrote in, they came in an email through the system. They said, you give off 90 chemicals. When you burn a foam cup or if you drink out of a foam cup, you're being exposed to 90 chemicals. Well, Fred Forrester tells me we don't even use 90 chemicals to make the product. We are violating the laws of thermodynamics. We're giving off more chemicals than we use to make the product. Here's the bottom line. When you cut through it all, cut through the conventional wisdom, cut through the science, here's the bottom line. There has never been a single, solitary, documented case, not one, of anybody ever drinking out of a foam cup and getting sick or dying. Not one. So, you know, if people want to worry about shark attack or being struck by lightning or hit by a meteorite or in a plane crash, those are precedented events. Getting sick from a foam cup is unprecedented. That's not to say the chances of getting sick are zero. It's to say they are so close to zero as to be incalculable. So the bottom line is, if you ban our product, If that's your solution, it doesn't get you where you need to be. So let's stop all the silliness. We don't need to go through any more of the reductio ad absurdum. Let's look at something else. Let's look at recycling. Now, I know you've all heard about CARE. I talked about it last year. Many of you have had CARE presentations. You've been trained on it. But you know what's interesting? In the mid-90s, we had 81 CARE programs. Then we went down to 3, and only one of those had a regular pickup. So I don't want to say CARE was dead. I just want to say it was in a deep coma. Well, the patient woke up. And in the last year, the patient is doing surprisingly well. We have, as of last week, 15 CARE programs. And we've got another 12 or so, give or take, that are pretty close. So it is entirely possible by the end of this calendar year, we could have 25 or 30 CARE programs. Now you may say, well, that's only 25 or 30. That's not what it could be, or that's not what it was in the mid-90s, but we're still making remarkable progress. You not only can use the DART densifier, which you see here, there are other densifiers that are sometimes being used, particularly for things like school lunch trays. There's the hardened densifier, there's the Polymax that you see here. We're trying to be flexible to the extent that we can. And then, of course, Recyclapack. Those of you in institutional sat in on the sessions this morning. Recyclapack is now going to be available in the 48 lower United States. That's amazing. Even if you don't place this service, just being able to talk about it, just being able to educate the consumer is enormously important. So we're making strides as a company with respect to recycling. But that's not all that we've done. We have some other things that we're doing as well. We are trying to have, and we're committed by the end of this calendar year, having all of our production facilities in the United States as a place where the public can drop off their foam products. And this is the sign from the Corona plant. So again, a drop-off facility in many communities around the United States. Those of you who know Michael Westerfield, he is now our corporate director of recycling programs. And one of the things that Michael has helped to set up is this take-back program with P&R Paper in Southern California. It's also something that Genpack and Pactiv are working with DART on. But they're using a hybrid truck to pick up mostly school lunch trays. We get about 250 cases every week. And they're coming back to us. We're hoping to have other distributors who will do this kind of thing. We've been talking with a distributor down in Mexico City about potentially having a program like this. That's an enormous change from the old days. Curbside recycling, we know about the Los Angeles Blue Bin program, but did you realize there are now at least 25 cities in California that have curbside recycling programs? And you might say, 25 cities, that's not so many. That's about 25 more than we had before. And we're not resting on our laurels. We are promoting recycling. Recycling's not the only answer, we know that, but it is a big part of the answer. These are the kinds of things that people like Michael Westerfield are working on. Now, many of you may say, well, gosh, those are great stories, and you tell us at the GSM. But how do we get the word out to people, third parties, to our customers, to school officials, to legislators, to regulators, et cetera, et cetera? Well, we have 3 firms that we're working with, Hill & Knowlton, which is a public relations firm, Porter Novelli, and Rose & Kendall. They're public relations and issues management firms. And they're helping us to come up with some messages. They're helping us to craft messages that we think that are important for the public to hear. Now, what's the difference between public relations and issues management? Public relations is coming up with a persuasive message that touts the attributes of our product. Issues management is figuring out how to place that message to the right people at the right time. I'm not a marketing person, so I have a tendency to say, why don't we just spend $3 million and have an ad at the Super Bowl? Of course, it's not my money, so easy for me to say. But all kidding aside, why don't we just do that? Just blanket the airwaves. Well, you know what the professionals at these firms are telling us? You don't want to use a shotgun. You don't want to use a hatchet when a scalpel is more effective. So what they're suggesting that we do is, if you use the shotgun approach, what happens is there's backlash. Because many environmentalists who weren't coming after you are now saying, gosh, there's a problem here. We need to do something. We need to go after the evil styrofoam. And we don't want that. So we want to come up with strategic ways to get this message out. And think about all the resources that we've used in this company. We have a government affairs and the environment department. There are 5 of us in the field. And our job, our only job, is to assist you in getting the message out, to make sure the markets stay open. So we've got Michael Westerfield, I've mentioned him. We've got Jonathan Choi on the West Coast. Anne-Marie Treglia out of Mason, she covers the Midwest. Ray Ehrlich, I've mentioned him, out of Baltimore. He covers the Northeast, and I cover the Southeast. That's 5 people. In addition, we have Cheryl Dykheis and Frank Leisman in Mason as well. That's a tremendous amount of time, energy, and resources devoted to getting these messages out. We've also had help from many of you. We've had a lot of you, particularly on the West Coast, who have helped us. You've testified at public hearings, or you've showed up to help get support for our product. I mean, I'm thinking of people like Michael Masrimas and Barry Brandt and Eleanor Tanaka and Christine Xavier, and I could go on and on and on. Many of you have helped us get the word out, to be strategic. And one of the ways you can tell you're being strategic is you can look at your earned media. Earned media means you didn't place an advertisement. You actually got favorable stories. And you got those favorable stories because the media showed up at certain events and they wrote the story without any prompting. We've had at least 25 favorable media placements just in the last few months. That's a tremendous track record. That's the kind of things those are the things we're doing in the company to get the word out. The right place, the right message, the right time, the right audience. That's what we're doing. Now, this is so important that we have to think about, how do you approach a hostile audience? How do you take this information and go to an audience and turn them around? Well, you can kind of look at the people that you deal with, and you can put them in 3 separate categories. You can have the people you're never going to convince, the real pro-environmentalists. There's nothing you could say. And then there's the people who are already on your side. You don't need to convince them. It's that middle group of people, those legislators, those regulators, those educators, those customers and distributors. Those are the people that you want to target. And that's what we're trying to do, get the right message to the right people at the right time. This is such an important issue, handling a hostile audience. It's so important that way back in 1992, when I first interviewed for a position at DART, Ann Mulroney, who became my boss, I think many of you remember Ann, she asked me in the interview, she said, Mike, have you ever had any media training? Have you ever had to deal with a hostile audience? When she asked me that, I thought of 2 words. And the 2 words were Nelson Mandela. Now you may say, why on earth would you think about a hostile audience and Nelson Mandela? I guess it's because Nelson Mandela was imprisoned in a South African prison for 27 years. I mean, talk about a hostile audience. It doesn't get more hostile than apartheid. Well, that would be a good guess, but I didn't think of Nelson Mandela because of that. I thought of him because, ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Mandela saved my professional career. He did. He doesn't know me. He couldn't pick me out of the lineup, but he saved my professional career. When you think about dealing with a hostile audience, you can get lucky or you can get smart. You can just say, I hope things work out, or you can get strategic. Well, I got lucky. Way back in February 1990, I was working for an environmental agency in Atlanta. Part of my job in those days was to oversee our intern program. We had a bunch of law students, we called them interns, and they worked in our office after school and on the weekends. And I remember we had this one intern, this is 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, I feel so old now. But anyway, we had this intern, and he was an older gentleman, he was already married, and he had bought a computer system for his wife's birthday. This was back in the days if you bought a CPU and a monitor and a printer, and you stacked them up, they were about the size of a washing machine. Some of you younger people may not know what I'm talking about here. You can see it in the museums, believe me. I fondly remember my Apple IIc. Anyway, this intern asked me if he could store the computer system in our office because it was a surprise for his wife's birthday, and he didn't want her to find it. And I said, sure, no problem. Well, that was 2 weeks earlier. On this particular day, he wanted to move the computer system down to his car, but the hand truck that he had had when he moved it in was missing. So we're having this conversation about the best way to get this computer system down to his car, and I recommended that he go out the side door of our building. There was a service elevator, and it led out to the employee parking lot. So we're having this conversation, and my boss comes running up, and he's in an absolute panic. I mean, just panicked. Now, this was the executive director of our agency. I almost never saw him. But on this particular day, he wanted to see me. He said, Mike, come down to my office right now. It's important. So he goes running down the hall, and I ran after him. We go into his office. He slams the door. He drapes his arm around me, and he carries me over to there's this big bay window he had overlooking the visitors' parking lot. And he points down. We were on the 3rd floor, so you could see the parking lot pretty well. He points down, and he says, do you see that van? And I look down, and there's a van, and these people are taking movie cameras out of the van. And I said, yeah. And he said, that is a camera crew from Inside Edition. I don't know how many of you remember this TV show. It was real popular back in the 1990s. It was one of these shows like A Current Affair or Hard Copy. They were sort of like 60 Minutes, but not as highbrow. These programs, they would like track celebrities and politicians that were misbehaving. They're called gotcha journalism, because they'd wait, and when you came out of your mistress's apartment, they'd go, gotcha! You know, and put you on camera. Well, when my boss told me that Inside Edition was coming to see us, I mean, why on earth? We didn't have any celebrities that worked in our office, and I didn't think we were misbehaving. And he says, Mike, no. 10 years earlier, we had a guy working in our office. He was a big Republican. And he was such a big Republican that President Reagan appointed him to a high-level position here in Washington, D.C. So long before I came to the agency, this guy, Ray Perry was his name. Ray Perry moves up to Washington, D.C. to take his high-profile job. He left his family in Atlanta. And every other weekend, he would go back and see his wife and kids. Turns out, while he was living in Washington, he was living with an exotic dancer, and they had developed a wicked cocaine habit. Being a public servant, he didn't have the money for this lavish lifestyle. So he was embezzling from his agency. He did this for years, until one day his exotic dancer girlfriend, I never forget her name, Kelly Gold. Yeah, must be a made-up name. Kelly Gold gets upset with Ray, so she goes to the federal prosecutors. He gets arrested for embezzlement, and he's now out on bond. And he hears that Inside Edition is doing a TV show on him, and they're going back to all the people that he knew and the people that he had worked with, and they're trying to, have a gotcha, interview. So they call my boss, and Ray Perry calls my boss, and he says, watch out for Inside Edition. Well, no sooner do we get this phone call, well, here they are. Well, my boss is telling me all this. I didn't know Ray Perry. I've never met Kelly Gold, thank God. Why are you telling me this? I start to get this sick feeling in my stomach. And he says, Mike, it is time that you had media training. It is time that you understand how to deal with a hostile audience. I sort of became like Porky Pig, Porky Pig, that's all, folks. And I said, I don't think I should be the one. I'm the lawyer in the back doing the research. I'm not really trained for this. And he says, no, Mike, you're going to get down there. You're going to be our on-camera spokesperson. And I said, but I'm ignorant. I don't know anything. I don't know Kelly Gold. I don't know Ray Perry. He said, finally, your ignorance will pay off. This is a strategic decision, Mike. And I said, I'm not doing it. And he said, yes, you are. He said, you are going to leave this building in the next 5 minutes. The question is, will you do it as a current employee or a former employee? Well, my boss was not good at hiring people. He was not good at supervising people. He was not good at mentoring or motivating people, but he was great at firing them. It was the only part of the job that he really enjoyed, and he excelled at it. So when he said he would fire me if I didn't get down there and talk to the camera crew, I knew he meant it. So it was sort of like dead man walking. I went out, and everyone in the office, they'd heard us screaming at each other. They were all standing there like a color guard, honor guard as I walked down the gauntlet. So I get down there. Now, the building that we were in had a very distinctive facade. Now that I think about it, it looked like the Alamo. And we had a sign with the agency's name on it. Well, when I got down to the parking lot, they were filming the front of the building, including the sign. So I decided I better jump in front of the sign, which I did. And then I gave them my business card. There were a bunch of them, too. There was the on-camera interviewer. There was the cameraman. There was the lighting person. There were a couple of production assistants. And it was like, chum in the water, here come the barracuda. And they start firing questions at me. Did you know Kelly Gold? Did she ever work here? Do you have exotic dancers on your payroll? All that kind of stuff. Well, they had this monitor where you could see what the camera was framing. So I looked down at the monitor. Now, they had all these bright lights on me. It was already a bright day outside. And I was about 50 pounds heavier in those days. So I was still in my 20s, so I had those cherub, chubby cheeks. So when I look down and I see this pasty white figure looking back at the monitor, you know what I was reminded of? That's what I looked like. Well, I didn't have the oven mitt or the hat on, and I was dressed more appropriately for television. But that's what I looked like, only I was a frightened Pillsbury Doughboy. Well, after about 30 seconds of, doughboy and headlights, I finally recovered enough to start talking, and I decided I need to move them away from the front of the building. So I'm talking, and I'm gesticulating, and I'm pontificating, and the camera is following me. And we're getting away from the front of the building. We're getting away from the sign. And I start to feel myself coming into my rhythm. So I'm going on and on about the Declaration of Independence and justice and all this kind of stuff. And they're following me. We go around the side of the building. And finally they ask me the question they really want to know. Did Ray Perry cavort with any sort of strippers when he worked for you? And did he steal anything? And I said, absolutely not. We are public servants. We look out for the American taxpayer. We would never allow theft in our office. And as soon as I said that, they start bursting out laughing. And I'm thinking, that's not funny. Why are you laughing? And I look down in the monitor, and I can see something behind me. I turn around. Here come the interns with computer equipment. Well, they start packing up their cameras now. I've just told them one thing, but they got a different visual. And television is a visual medium. So I'm going, wait, time out. We need to do that again. And they're like, no, thank you, sir. We have just what we need. I can see the sort of headline at night. Stupid fat lawyer makes fool of self, film at 11. And I know that's what they're going to show. And they said it would show on the air. It would be on TV within 4 days. They had so many scandals, they were on multi-nights during the week. And I thought, that's it. Because, even if you look sort of innocuous, even if you look safe, like the Pillsbury Doughboy, by the time the media finishes with you, okay, they can manipulate your image. So I'm convinced, this is it. When my boss sees this TV show, I'm going to get fired. There's absolutely no question in my mind. So I go back upstairs. I've actually made it worse than it was. So I get up there and my boss says, "How did it go, Mike? Did you show them something?" I said, "Oh, yeah. Yes, sir, I showed them something. They're still talking about my interview." 4 days later, it happened to be a Saturday. They showed Inside Edition on Saturdays in those days, too. It was at 7 o'clock at night. All day long, I was sick to my stomach. It wasn't a great job, but I still didn't want to get fired. I couldn't even turn on the TV set. I sat around all day just feeling sick. Finally, 5 minutes to 7, I turn on the TV set. I've got no choice, because I know as soon as the show airs, my boss will call and fire me, and that will be the end of it. And guess what? They call this in cheap novels the Deus ex machina, the ghost in the machine. It's when the cavalry comes in and saves the day at the 11th hour. I turn on the TV set, breaking news. This is before CNN. Breaking news. They have preempted all the TV shows to tell us Nelson Mandela has been released from prison. People all over the world are shedding tears of joy, and I am one of those people. Thank you for your charity. I will take it. So the nice thing was, I didn't lose my job, because guess what? By the time that show came on again, and a few days after that, they had other scandals, other juicier things to go on to. They never did show the Ray Perry story. So what's the point of this tangled tale that I told? It's this. When you're dealing with people who don't like you, who don't like your message, you can depend on dumb luck, and sometimes dumb luck will see you through. It did me. My career is a testimony to dumb luck. Or you can get smart. You can get focused. You can get strategic. So if you remember nothing else about what I say, remember this. I got lucky, but Dart got smart. Thank you.